Among other things, in this parak, we hear of Edom rebelling against Yehuda. Now, it's important to realize that for much of the history of the Tanakh, while there is a settled kingdom of Edom out in southern Jordan of today, we also find that they have a significant population of nomads who make their way, it could be anywhere between Jordan through the Negev, sometimes reaching all the way to the Sinai, right across the way. Okay, so we find this nomadic group coming across here, and as you generally have with nomads, they're generally living right on the periphery, on the edge of the desert, what's called Sfar Midbar, right along the edge of the settled land. And the reason for this is because, on the one hand, in that area, you can't do agriculture because they don't get enough rain. On the other hand, it's not out deep into the desert where there really is very little greenery for their sheep and goats. So they're going to want to be right on the edge of the desert. However, any chance that they get that they can try to push northwards a little bit and go into the settled land, of course, things will be much easier for them because then they don't have to chase around and look all over the place, wander as far to be able to find greenery for their herds. And as such, any chance that they get to do that, they're going to do it. Of course, the farmers are not going to be happy with that because they put in all this work to try to plant, and then their animals come in and not only nibble, they uproot the entire plants. So that's of course really bad for the agriculture in the area. And the only thing that's going to keep these nomads out is if there's a strong central government that really protects the border. Otherwise, they're going to keep breaking in and pushing further and further north. And we find this time and again with the different nomads, both with Edom specifically, as in our case, and nomads throughout history in this region. For example, later on we'll see, and we're not going to go into this as much in the video, but we're going to talk about it here now, so hopefully you remember it for then. When Bavel comes in and they exile the nation, and they're coming in essence from the north of Israel, Edom is going to take advantage of that opportunity to attack from the south and take over huge areas of the Negev of the Tanakh and beyond to be able to push upwards, northwards into the settled land area where there's much more greenery. It'll be a lot easier. They won't have to wander around as much. And we're going to find them going all the way up into the Shvela, the rolling hills of Yehuda. They'll even go up to Darom Har Chevron, the area of the southern Hebron hills. And as things get easier for them, they're going to start to settle. They're not going to have to move around as much. Maybe they'll even do a little bit of agriculture. And then once they get used to settling there, they're going to have a similar issue than we do. So we come back after 70 years. Again, there have always been some Jewish people here, even throughout the exiles. But when we as a nation really come back after 70 years and we're starting Bayit Sheni, now all of a sudden we have Edomians, which is the Edom, as they're called in Bayit Sheni times, and they're settled in the area, in the southern area of Yehuda. And so we end up incorporating them in. They end up actually converting. Apparently, according to Sefer Maccabim, this is very strange. We don't have other examples of this throughout history, but apparently the Chashmonim actually forced them to convert. We don't know exactly what that means. Were they just encouraged, or what exactly was the threat otherwise? Maybe just so that they can be incorporated. Whatever it is, we find that they had to convert, and they did. He's the one, of course, who built the Kotel, and he's the one who built up Masada, Caesarea, and many other areas. Herodian, of course, okay, and many other areas. So we find that they really do integrate much more, at least to a degree. But once the Edomians, once Edom settles, now they have a problem. And the problem is, can they hold on to that border? Are they strong enough? Do they have a strong enough central government to be able to hold the border from the nomads who come in after them? Because once they're settled, new nomads are going to come into the south of them. And so we do find the Nabateans coming in, and they really become the kings of the desert. And they're wandering through, they're living a nomadic lifestyle until they get comfortable and they start settling as well. And so we find this time and time again on the edge, on the very periphery of the settled land, that we're going to have these nomads coming through. And it really can cause a serious problem to the point where later on, we have them coming in and nomads taking over the entire land, the entire region. And those are the Muslims coming from the Arabian Peninsula, breaking into the area until they're pushed back as well by the Crusaders. And it goes back and forth. The stronger the Crusaders are, the more they'll push them out, and etc. But for a time, the Muslims are actually controlling this entire area, and they come from a nomadic lifestyle to begin with. They settle as well, of course. And then they battle it out. And then in modern times, when the Ottoman Empire is controlling this entire area, Israel is in essence the very edge of the civilized world of the Ottoman Empire. It's the edge of the empire. And we find that on the very edge of the edge, in the Negev, again, we have these nomads coming in. And you may have guessed it, that's the Bedouin. So the Ottoman tried to settle the Bedouin, and they don't manage to get the Bedouin to settle. That's in fact how Beersheba, the modern city of Beersheba, the fourth largest city in Israel, was first established, was in an attempt by the Ottomans to have the Bedouin settle there, but it didn't quite work out. So they didn't manage to get the Bedouin to settle. The Brits after them try to get the Bedouin to settle, and they don't succeed. And finally, here we are. And we have a similar issue because the Bedouin now, on the one hand, they're only semi-nomadic in Israel. We don't have any fully nomadic Bedouin in Israel anymore. You still have in Jordan and in Sinai, but here they're only at most what's considered semi-nomadic, meaning they're still living in these shacks, but they're not moving around anymore. Now, it is important at this point to notice the difference between Bedouins of the north, south, and center. So, for example, in the north, Bedouins are much more integrated. Many of them will volunteer to serve not only in the IDF, but in elite forces of the IDF, including tracker units and things like that. Very cool stuff. Good citizens of the state of Israel. On the other hand, in the south, for the most part, we have a much bigger problem because there you still have a lot of illegal encampments or towns or villages, I guess would be the best word, where you have Bedouin who are living a lifestyle that, on the one hand, we don't consider to be in their best interest. We want them to have good education and healthcare and proper infrastructure, but many of them don't necessarily even want that at this point. And of course, we also want them to be good law-abiding citizens, which is not necessarily something that they care about in those encampments. On the other hand, we do have in the south the very first Bedouin city, Rahat. It's already a city. This is an established city with proper infrastructure, proper education, proper facilities. As a general view of what's going on with the Bedouin today, on the one hand, they're still growing, and there's still many of them that aren't integrated. On the other hand, they're going through a process of becoming more integrated and becoming more settled, which is also something fascinating just from a sociological perspective. When we look back at the fact that we were nomads, and we look at the different nomads who were here throughout history, like some of the ones that we mentioned before, and how they went through this process from nomadic lifestyle to being settled. And again, that's a process we ourselves went through. Here we can actually see it live in this civilization as they're going through this process. And it's fascinating. We see some of the issues that they deal with along the way, including perhaps an identity crisis, because Bedouin are Muslims. And so then if they're not living a Bedouin lifestyle culturally, what makes them Bedouin as opposed to just Muslim? That's a question. That's a question that they have to deal with. And it's kind of an identity crisis that they're going through at the moment in their own villages, especially those who are settling in cities and becoming more integrated. Are they still Bedouin if they're no longer living a Bedouin lifestyle? So something they have to deal with. Of course, we as a nation, even though we went through a similar process, we have the Torah. And so that's what kept our identity going and really preserved our identity throughout the different generations, the different stages, and the different situations that we've been in. For our purposes, we're going to go back for a moment to Edom and to mention that for the meantime, they're going to continue to be a thorn in our sides throughout. The only thing that can keep them at bay is having a strong central government. And it's in essence, by the way, the same thing today with the Bedouin, only a strong central government with a strong backbone, that's willing to say, hey, these are our rules here, and you have to follow them. That's the only way that we end up not having chaos in the Negev. And unfortunately, that's simply not always the case. Okay, so stay tuned, keep an eye out for Edom, and watch what's going to happen with them. Each time you hear the name Edom mentioned, keep it in mind and think about what we've mentioned here as far as that nomadic lifestyle and the process that they're going through.